At the commencement of the film, we observe a bee in flight, which subsequently becomes ensnared by a wasp and is brought down to the ground, where it receives a sting. The scene then transitions to the primary character, Julia, who is the proprietor of a catering enterprise. She is aided in her endeavors by Paul, her sole employee. At the location of the event, Julia retrieves the phone from Paul to ensure they can proceed with their tasks without squandering time. It is here that she encounters June or the housemaid Flora and takes note of her surroundings. The musician designated for the event had already arrived and was in the process of setting up his equipment. While engaged in his tasks, he approaches Paul. Sidney, who is the son of the owner, secretly consumes beer because he harbors a significant fear of his mother. Observing him, it appeared that he was somewhat different, or, as one might describe, unique. He confides this to Paul. In reality, we do not reside here permanently. We visit this villa on occasion to host parties. During their conversation, we also observe Sidney's pet wandering in the garden, and without realizing it, it digs a hole in a location where beneath there was an entire wasp nest, and one of the wasps emerged and stung Paul, ripping his trousers. He became extremely flustered and went to change his trousers. While working, he inadvertently ended up in the owner's private garden, where the pet was also present. Eventually, night descended, and we observed that the guests had arrived and the party had commenced. Numerous prominent individuals were at the gathering, including the city's mayor. Julia and Paul were diligently serving the guests, and during this time we noticed Julia step on something on the same nest that the pet had dug up in the morning. The guests didn't realize what had happened, but now the wasp started coming out from there. What can be understood at the party? So Paul managed to kill quite a few wasps, but one of them went and sat on Sidney's shoulder, which he swatted away with his hand. Abbas's song just wouldn't stop. One guest's condition started worsening because they had been stung by many wasps at once. All the guests gathered around to see what was happening, and then it was shown. Suddenly, an extraordinarily vast swarm of wasps emerged from a concealed hole and began settling on each guest, stinging them. Those who managed to eliminate the wasps were all right, but those who couldn't were in significant trouble. Their sting wasn't like an ordinary wasp's. These wasps were depositing eggs in the guests' bodies through their stings, which resulted in a terrifying transformation. The egg would metamorphose the entire human body. It appeared as though a wasp as enormous as a human being would erupt from within an individual's body. Throughout this entire ordeal, the individual was perishing, and an even more unsettling spectacle was that fragments of shredded human flesh were dangling from these gigantic wasps. Paul observed with his very own eyes a wasp ripping through a man's body and emerging, leaving him completely horrified. Paul and Julia notice an opportunity. They attempt to shield themselves using a tablecloth and swiftly make their way into the house. However, right at that moment, Julia's attention is diverted when she observes a vase gradually emerging from a woman's mouth. Due to being jostled, the ball tumbles, and her sister's key also falls nearby. After fully emerging from the woman's body, the vase stands in close proximity to the ball, poised to consume it. Julia's focus remains on the woman's face, which is adhered to the vase's wings. Before the vase can devour Paul, Julia arrives and, with considerable bravery, kicks the vase away. Moving away, they catch Paul and take him inside the house. From inside, Flora was quickly telling them to come in, and hearing her voice, a wasp tried to attack her, but before that, its abdomen came out of the house, and it left Flora to chase its abdomen. Taking advantage of this situation, Flora, Paul, and Julia safely got inside. Besides them, there were only 3 people in the house. Sidney, Sidney's mom, and the mayor were all terrified. It felt like a nightmare to everyone, but not everyone can have the same dream. They needed to find a way to survive, but they didn't even have a phone. Then Sidney mentioned a landline in the house. But just then, they saw that a wasp attacked a car driver, causing the driver to lose control of the car, which then crashed into the telephone power line, and their connection was lost. The telephone connection gets cut off. A terrifying scene is shown through the car window where a human body is being ripped apart. In the room where they were standing, a living person outside the window is asking for their help. He was requesting, "Please open the window and let me in," but Sidney refuses, saying that if you are stung, it will be a problem for all of us. Sidney might have seemed foolish to them, but he was not foolish at all. He tells everyone that this house is no longer safe. If we want to stay safe, we must proceed and wait for assistance there. As they were formulating their strategy, they abruptly heard Flora's scream and hurried to discover that Sidney's mother had harmed her. It was unveiled that Sidney's mother had been stung, and a massive wasp was beginning to emerge from her body.
Before it could completely emerge, Sydney forcefully kicked her away. Before any further incidents could occur, they swiftly relocated to another room and closed the door. Given that Flora was injured, they positioned her in front of the door. In this manner, before they could think of anything, a wasp thrust its sting through the door where Flora was sitting, and it pierced her eye, stabbing through her entire head, taking her life. They were still in shock from this horrific death when the hidden wasp reached its hand through the door and grabbed Paul. However, they didn't let Paul die. Julia and Mayer wounded the wasp with a knife and saved Paul. After rescuing him, they quickly ran towards the basement, but then the wasp signaled to summon all the wasps. They started calling towards them, which made them realize that this was the Wasp Queen. They ran into the basement and locked themselves in, but now they were managing.
Will they discover safety in the basement? At this very moment, we observe movement within Sydney's body. The previously silent area was now bustling with activity. Clearly, something significant was about to emerge. Sydney was aware of what was unfolding. He had always been different, and his parents never truly valued him or recognized his intelligence. He frequently conducted experiments, and this time, he introduced a growth hormone he had developed into the fertilizer. He understood that from this very substance. These were the mutes of all the vases. Sydney was just explaining all this when suddenly the lights went out, and it was shown that the lights weren't actually cut by the vase because their body had a human brain. They could think and understand. Cutting the lights didn't benefit the vase much. The lights came back on with a backup generator. However, these actions of the vase frightened the people greatly. They didn't want to see what else the vase could do. They soon planned to leave. But how would they leave the city? The key to Ball 1 had fallen outside. Who would be the one to bring it? He assumes the responsibility for this perilous task himself. He hurriedly rushed outside and located the key. He noticed it right there. Sydney's stomach was positioned there. He was on the verge of going to rescue him. However, then, from within him, a vapor of the same magnitude emerged and assaulted Ball without any forewarning. To protect himself, Ball hit the ground and discovered an ice pick, with which he attacked the vapor and eliminated it. In this manner, his life was preserved. In the basement, the most dangerous and close encounter is depicted. A vapor was also emerging from Sydney's body. But because Sydney was a deformed human, the entity didn't emerge from his body like it would from normal humans. Instead, a small entity came out of his body. From his deformed, grotesque form, that small entity completely took over Sydney's body and mind. Before Sydney had the opportunity to launch an attack on Julia and the mayor, Ball made a daring and heroic entrance through the window with an impressive stunt, knocking Sydney down. Sydney was on the verge of getting back up before him, so Ball swiftly swung his legs and hurled him away. Then, without delay, the mayor and Paul seized a shelf and dropped it on him. After that, they were liberated from this predicament. They just needed to make their escape, but they couldn't utilize the basement window because numerous boxes began pouring in from there. When they ascended the stairs, they were taken aback by what they saw. He had transformed the entire residence into his own domain. They resolved to proceed cautiously from that point, but regrettably, Maya's foot triggered a trap and he became ensnared by it. Both of them attempted to rescue Maya, but the creature was in the process of tearing him apart at that moment. Maya selflessly sacrificed himself so that at least Paul and Julia could continue to survive. The creature was now poised to pursue them as well, but there was a room directly ahead of them into which they entered and secured the door, and for the time being, their lives were preserved. For now, their lives were saved, but they also knew that they couldn't survive for much longer. At the moment, they were exhausted, so they didn't hide under the table. While talking, they were very close. However, at that moment, they become aware that a wasp has breached the door and is on the verge of launching an attack on them. In a desperate attempt to protect themselves, they topple the table onto the wasp. Before they can take any further action, the wasp manages to create a fissure in the ceiling. In order to escape, they make their way outside through the shattered wall. They urgently needed to reach their sister, but how could they possibly do so? Above them was the Queen, who pierced Paul's shoulder. She was in the process of taking Paul away, but Julia stepped in to intervene. Julia broke its sting. This action angered the Queen, who then picked up Julia and threw her far away. After that, the Queen started taking Paul away. She could have escaped to save herself, but Paul's screams stopped her. The Queen took Paul to the place where they had kept the other humans. Sydney was also there. He removed the sting from Chopal's shoulder. Sydney was not human at this point. He was also a type of wasp. That's why he didn't remove the sting from Paul's shoulder to help him. It was taken out for torture. At this time, the Queen gives a larva, which Sydney tries to insert into Paul. Before he could succeed in his plan, Julia makes an entrance from behind with an electric saw. First, she cuts the vapor present on Sydney with this saw and throws it away, and with the same saw, she also prevents the Queen from reaching Paul. As Julia was bringing Paul outside, the Queen started following them, but now Sydney, who was no longer under the control of the Wasps, assisted them. He helps both of them and catches the Queen from behind, but then the Queen stops and kills Sydney. By this time, they had reached their sister. They had opened several gas pipes in the house, and then they lit a match to blow up the house. Finally, with the house burning, all the Wasps there were also destroyed, and they felt that all their troubles were over. But that wasn't the case. The Queen quickly started chasing them again. She had already joined forces with her sister to kill these people, Paul. The car crashed painfully, killing the Queen as well. In this accident, Julia was in very bad condition, and efforts were made to bring her to consciousness. However, it seemed to him that Julia had died when she didn't regain consciousness for a long time. Just as he was about to lose hope, Julia opened her eyes and he breathed a sigh of relief. Meanwhile, rescue and police officers arrived and finally provided them with rescue treatment. They finally kissed here and were about to leave when suddenly a large cow's head appeared. It states that an officer is overtaken and loses his life. From afar, it is depicted that numerous enormous creatures are now advancing to attack them, emerging from within the cattle's body. Just as they had previously attacked humans and formed a large entity inside new humans, in a similar manner, they were now emerging from within the cattle. What was going to unfold next? With this enigma, the movie concludes at this point.